Well, I'm back. I am so excited about this presentation, and I'm really going to say just 2 lines, and I'm going to let our presenters take it away. They have a really interesting and fascinating presentations. But I just wanted to say, we've been noticing this thread of conversation throughout the last few days around, the place we're in the research landscape, and, some uncertainties ahead, and, looking at practices that we can do to both, Paul's really wonderful presentation earlier to kind of accelerate, to work with AI and new technologies, but also, thinking a little bit about how we're going to be maintaining trust and maintaining, processes around research integrity. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to our presenters. Amanda's going to start us off.
Thanks so much for having us, and thank you for that introduction, Pramita. So my name is Amanda French, and I work at Crossref. I am Technical Community Manager for the Research Organization Registry, or ROR. Can I get a quick show of hands? Who has heard of ROR? Most people. That's good. I'm hoping, I often begin these talks with a definition of ROR. I'm doing a little bit less of that this time, but it's woven in. And if you still don't understand what it is by the end of the talk, you can always come and find me. Happy to explain it to you for another hour. So we are going to talk today about ROR, Crossref, and open metadata in the age of AI. ROR, for those of you who do know what it is one example of a persistent identifier, or a PID. And again, I'm going to define PIDs in just a moment, but even before I get into a definition of what a PID is, I want to talk about why they're important and why we're here talking to you about them today. So I've stolen a quotation that you're actually going to hear again when my colleague Shauna presents, just because I thought this really encapsulated it really well. In the age of AI, which is an era where content can be synthesized in seconds, provenance, meaning who, where, and how, becomes almost more valuable than the content itself. We talked about trust at the very beginning of this session, and I think that that's what PIDs are all about. They're about transparency, they're about citing your sources for machines, they are about provenance. So persistent identifiers are important in the age of AI because they enable reliable, machine-readable provenance. Here's the promised definition of PID, persistent identifier. I like this one a lot. This comes from the U.S. Department of Energy, their Office of Scientific and Technical Information, or ORCID. They've agreed on this, they update it periodically, and many people use this. And if you can read this, there's a few things that are emphasized here. Persistent identifiers are globally unique, which means that no one else in the world uses that particular identifier to identify anything else other than the actual thing it identifies. That's a really key point. Another point is that they are persistent. We use the word persistent, not permanent, because as the I Ching tells us, nothing is permanent in this world. It's really human beings who are responsible for making sure that these identifiers continue to resolve to whatever they're identifying. But honestly, sometimes that doesn't work. So they are persistent, they are as permanent as human beings can make them. They are machine readable. Very, very important, right? And not only are the identifiers themselves machine readable, in practice, this usually means that most persistent identifiers, at least most of the common ones that we work with, are URIs. They're URLs. A DOI is a URL. An ORCID is a URL. A ROR ID is a URL. They are machine readable underneath that as well, because another really key point about this definition is that it's not just about the identifier. It's about associated metadata that is linked to that identifier, so that machines can essentially suck in that identifier, and when they do that, it's possible to suck in all of that associated information as well. So DOIs have a lot of metadata in them, probably more than most people realize if they're just seeing it as a single link on a publication page. So the key point here is that PIDs are not just identifiers, but they are nodes that connect to rich information about the entity the identifier refers to. So again, here are three of the most common persistent identifiers in this space. The DOI for research outputs is the oldest one, came into being in 1997. ORCID is about 15 years old. I always want to say invented, but that's not quite the right word, but created in 2012. And then ROR is the newest of these identifiers. We just celebrated our 7th anniversary this year. We have our annual meetings every year at the end of January to celebrate our anniversaries. And you can see here that these are research outputs, so journal articles and data sets, people, and organizations. These are three entities that need identification. And here's a sort of a visual representation of how these persistent identifiers connect to each other. This is fairly dense. You could do more simple ones. And of course, the three PIDs that I'm showing here are not the only ones. There are emerging ones. There are other ones. There are discipline-specific ones. But these are three of the most common and most important ones. But you can kind of see here from this image, which comes from a Japanese open science strategy document, this illustrates what's sometimes called the PID graph. So PIDs are global, and in a global context, they increase the visibility of research, they enable evaluation of research, and they help ensure research integrity, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. So I really love Dr. Stern's breakdown, again, at the beginning of this conference, of all of the many things that are now lumped together under the term AI. And using that broad term especially, PIDs make all this vast ocean of scholarly information easier to analyze using all of those different kinds of methods. So it could be LLMs, sure, but it could be just sort of older natural language processing methods, older machine learning methods. All of these things kind of rely a lot on PIDs or are improved vastly by PIDs. So DOIs, ORCID IDs, ROR IDs all reflect trusted, high-quality information, and ORCID offers additional features such as authentication and trust markers, and these are all providing trust signals in the research information network. So let's get a little more specific now. Here's a really specific example that I like of how ROR in particular helps support research integrity. So one thing that AI has made far easier, as we all know, is the speedy generation of fraudulent papers. Paper mill, as you doubtless know, is an entity that systematically produces fake papers and sells them to researchers. so that they can put their name on them and then get credit for those in their tenure and promotion processes or what that might be. It's a growing problem. And it predates the age of AI, but AI has certainly made that kind of work a lot easier. One very popular and well-known tool for detecting paper mill activity is the paper mill alarm, which is developed by Adam Day of Clear Skies Limited. Adam Day is a big fan of ROR, and he relies on it in the paper mill alarm. And he was kind enough to sit down with me a couple of years ago and explain why he's such a big fan of ROR in an interview I did with him that's on the ROR blog. So you can see some quotations from that here. He's pointing out that the large scale of the paper mill problem requires a large-scale solution, one that requires, quote, looking at all of the data together, end quote. He's also emphasizing here how crucial it is that ROR is open, just like DOIs are open and ORCID is open, cross-ref metadata is open, DataCite metadata is open, ORCID is open, ROR is open, and they all have completely free, no cost, open APIs, and even downloadable data sets that let people work with this information without any barriers. If you want to download all the cross-ref DOIs, which right now is about 600 million, that's a very large data set. You can't just save it as an Excel spreadsheet on your laptop. But nevertheless, it is available, and there's an API. Same with ORCID. ORCID is quite a large data set. ROR is not quite as large. ROR has about 120,000 organizations in it. So it's perfectly easy to download. But getting back to the paper mill alarm, this is a screenshot from the paper mill alarm. Now, we've deliberately obscured the university names here, but basically you can see what the paper mill alarm is doing here. All of the organization names, which have been grayed out, have been matched to ROR IDs and to OpenAlex IDs. OpenAlex matches all organization names to ROR IDs and relies heavily on machine learning and AI methods to do that because those ROR IDs are not yet reliably available in DOI metadata. Most DOI metadata, only about 60% of DOI metadata includes the author's affiliation at all as a text string. But when that text string is available, you can use these machine learning methods and AI methods to match it to a ROR ID and normalize the data so you know for sure you're talking about the same organization, right? And as I was mentioning earlier, Crossref has plans this year to begin enhancing DOI metadata automatically using these same methods by matching those strings to identifiers and putting them in the DOI metadata and saying this is asserted by Crossref, right? So that they will be in there by next year, both for funders and for author affiliations. So the paper mill alarm does take some of this from OpenAlex, which does this kind of matching. The paper mill alarm also does this kind of matching. And what it's detecting here is signals of potential paper mill activity by institution. So if you take 56% of the papers published by authors affiliated with a particular institution, and 56% of those papers are throwing off signals that they may have been generated by a paper mill, that's troubling, and that's something that you want to look at, right? And that we could talk about the signals. It's not really what this paper is about, but essentially you do need to normalize that data, make sure you're associating that with the correct institution, because, you know, ultimately, I mean, publishers are responsible for this, yes, but also institutions, right? Responsible for preventing this and for policing it when it does happen. So, and this work wouldn't be possible without persistent identifiers for organizations. If you tried to work only with the endless variations of text names that are in that DOI metadata for author affiliations, your results just wouldn't be reliable. You couldn't count on them. So similarly, about a year ago, a journalist at Nature spoke with Clear Skies and other companies that are doing this work and providing it as a service to publishers and other entities for paper mill activity detection, fraudulent paper detection. And in Nature, this article came out exposing some of the top universities that seem to be allowing or even encouraging their researchers to publish fraudulent papers based on the number of retracted papers by institution, right? So retractions is another thing you can look at to detect this kind of difficulty. So I've highlighted here one point that this data is inherently messy, which is invariably true, especially when it comes to person names or organization names. And this is the problem that open persistent identifiers like ROR and ORCID and the services that ROR and ORCID provide are meant to solve. So this is just a little irony here. Ironically, the first version of this Nature article misnamed one of the universities it identified as having a high retraction rate. So in the chart, you can see it's the Addis Ababa University of Science and Technology in Ethiopia that is one of the organizations of concern. But in the text, they said it's Addis Ababa University that's named. And that's an entirely different organization. And so Nature had to issue a retraction, which you can see, or not a retraction, but a correction, which you can see in the bottom left there. And in ROR, here's an example of ROR records. Each of these separate, completely different organizations has its own record and its own ROR ID. So, here's just one example of why this disambiguation is so important. You can't just go around accusing the wrong university of having a high retraction rate. And they got it correct in their data. It was just basically a typo in the text, but I found that ironic. So since I'm sure we have some metadata experts here, I just thought I'd show an example of exactly where ROR IDs live in the metadata of a DOI. Crossref has over 20,000 members from around the world, and those members include large publishers like Elsevier and Wiley. Elsevier has registered nearly 25 million DOIs with Crossref since Crossref's founding in 2000. But 20,000 members really includes a lot of very, very small publishers. So for instance, there is the Korean Association of Feminist Philosophers. They publish a journal, and they have registered 186 DOIs with Crossref over the years. In this example, this is only some of the metadata that is linked to a DOI, right? And in here, you can see that the publisher is the Journal of Integrated Disaster Risk Management, which is based at Kyoto University in Japan, and they've registered 261 DOIs with Crossref, including one for an article co-written by an author at Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia, which is not one of the universities with a high retraction rate. I'll mention here too that not all or even most DOIs include ORCID IDs and ROR IDs. Adoption is certainly increasing, and Crossref is beginning to, as I say, enhance this DOI metadata by saying, we think that this name matches this ROR ID. And that's coming later this year. And these post-publication matching strategies that entities like OpenAlex and Paper Mill Alarm and soon Crossref are implementing are great, But the ideal is to get that information added as early in the process as possible, certainly at the point of DOI creation, if not earlier, because it's more likely to be accurate there. So in conclusion, here's just a couple of things I'd like to ask you to do. I've had some initial conversations with Permita about building ROR into digital commons. And if you think that would be valuable, especially if you're hosting journal content, maybe not all of you are, but especially if you are, that might be a good thing to talk about with your digital commons representative. Now, I know that digital commons data is a totally separate platform, but I thought some of you might be using that as well. Some of you may have seen some presentations about the Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative. We have Ishwar here from NIH. And Digital Commons Data / Mendeley Data was one of the participating repositories in that initiative. And as part of that, we built ROR into that. And so if you do happen to use Digital Commons data, you can take a look at your metadata, or I can help you or whatnot, and you should have ROR IDs in there. And then just finally, I just wanted to make the general point that including persistent identifiers in your DOI metadata makes information better throughout the whole scholarly ecosystem. And that's especially important for research integrity, as well as for a lot of things we've been talking about at this conference, like impact tracking, even university rankings. There's a lot of publications that go missing when you can't track them reliably with persistent identifiers. And that's really all I have for you today. And I will pass things over to Shauna. Yes.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here today. I'm a bit tired. This conference is a lot, and I'm assuming all of you are a bit tired too. And so Amanda did a great job. Thank you for introducing PIDs and kind of giving you the landscape and kind of the why. So I am Shauna Sadler with ORCID. So my first question is, who here has an ORCID ID? Lots of hands, fantastic. So thank you all. And just so you know, those who don't, it's free, right? Register for an ORCID ID, it's free, hooray. And then if you time it, I'm sure it'll take you less than 60 seconds to register. I've seen people who type with fingers, just index fingers, and they can register in under 60 seconds. So Amanda did a great job of doing the landscape. And so now I'm going to do a little bit more of a deeper dive into AI and the world of PIDs. So I think it's really important that each of our PID providers, ORCID, Crossref, DataCite, we have these big registries. So just, I like to think of it as like a big database or just like a big container of data. You know, ORCID, we have, I think we're at 12 or 14 million active ORCID records. That's data going in and out. I mean, way more have been registered, but like really active records. And then we have 6,000 systems that are connected to that registry, pushing data and pulling data in and out. So I'd love to do a heat map of it someday. Like, it is hot, right? And same with RORs, you know, it's a lot. So in these containers, as Amanda described, there is structured metadata of all of this content that we have. And, you know, we are moving into this new frontier from the search engines, and now we're going to AI. So our containers in the past, by the big search engines, you know, they would send their crawlers in, right? They'd send their spiders, they would crawl for the new content, index it, and then they would make it available as search results, right? Google search results and stuff. Well, we're seeing similar behavior from the AI tools. They're coming in and we can see them indexing, or they like to use the word harvest, our data regularly. They collect all the new data, and they're using it, and we're testing it, but they're using it not just for search results like they did the search engines, but synthesizing it. So using that and processing that data to give you enhanced results. So, like Amanda was saying, the more you can provide that structured metadata, the better for the AI tools. AI tools, we've all talked about, it's new, and gosh, you know what? They're not that strong yet. And I won't say which one I use, but I can tell if I give it 3 or 4 commands, by the 4th, it starts speaking jibber jabber, just like my children when I've overwhelmed them. Like they're not that strong. It's still early days, and that's okay. We can all see the potential there. But the structured metadata, in this crowd, we can talk about that, like the tags. You tell AI, this is the title, and here's the tag title, right? AI understands that and doesn't have to work that hard. Whereas if it's just a plain text where there's no headings or no structure to it, it has to try and figure out what's the title or what's an author, and now you're making it work too hard. And it's going to start giving you jibber jabber, And we're all content providers here in our own ways. And so the more you can structure the data, the better that data can be used by these AI tools out there. And then you're trying to highlight the research of your institution, your researchers. So when you provide that really rich metadata with the structure to it, AI can do more with it, which means it can go further in the world and have bigger impact. So yeah, it's such an exciting time. We've been part of these big transitions in technology, and here we go again. This is the next wave. So one of the things Amanda mentioned, and ORCID, we've started this, is we started to introduce trust markers. Because unfortunately, and this is predating AI, as Amanda mentioned, research integrity has been a problem for a little bit. We have authors who claim to be with certain organizations who are not. And, it's important to make sure that people are using research responsibly, representing themselves, responsibly. And there's just all sorts of these issues that are unfortunately happening. And they're having repercussions on research, and that has impact on society. So we have to do our best to try and tighten up the data, and so that way we can help maintain research integrity to the best that we can. It's hard. It's really tough. So at ORCID, what we do is researchers register for an ORCID ID, and then they can share it with the different stakeholders in the research community. So their employer, their publisher, their funder. And when they do that, they approve that stakeholder to write data to their ORCID record. And so that, when they apply for funding, they approve the funder to write that data. And of course, it's a brilliant application, and they give them lots of money for that. And so that funder can write that funding data to the ORCID record, and that's structured metadata in there. And what we do is we give it a green check mark. So it's this green check mark you see in the top corner there, just as a visual identity, but we've also included it in the metadata. So AI, when they harvest it, they can see, oh, this is a trust marker. If AI is smart enough, and it will get there, it will be able to tell the difference between self-asserted, which is, or trusted metadata. And so that green check mark helps it. So the same thing goes with publishers and, employers as well. So hopefully the more trust markers in an ORCID record, or the more trust markers we can build into the scholarly ecosystem, the more trustworthy we can make all the content in the scholarly communications ecosystem, and also help mitigate research integrity issues. And now, unfortunately, we also have research security that we have to manage as well. But the more structured data with the more persistent identifiers, the better. So one of the things is AI is helping to do things at scale, right? Produce lots of content, harvest lots of content, synthesize lots of content. Everything's happening bigger, faster, and hopefully stronger and hopefully better. And so, unfortunately, AI is also helping the opposite happen, as Amanda mentioned. These unfortunate organizations are creating, these paper mills, more false content that is, reducing the integrity. And so we're hoping that we'll have AI tools that will be able to identify them, because chances are they won't have any PIDs or any correct PIDs in that paper, and AI should be able to find those and identify them and flag them faster. But hopefully the opposite is true. So like all the work that you're putting out into the world will have lots of PIDs, lots of trust markers, and AI tools will be able to quickly identify, yes, this is a trustworthy paper, yes, this has integrity, continue it forward, keep it in. So the last point I really like is that integrity at scale. With all your systems, if you're using Pure, you can write data to ORCID records. If you're using Digital Commons, include as many PIDs as possible. All of our systems, the more you can build in PIDs, the greater the integrity of the work you're putting out into the world. And the world needs it. And so I keep thinking of AI as like my children. AI is just, they're still under training, and we are all providing mass amounts of content training these AI tools. And so if we train it with high expectations, and please, expect these PIDs, this is the trustworthy data, and please identify when there is not trustworthy data. It's hopefully training the AI tools to differentiate and then help us move forward with integrity. One of the things that's great is, if you've noticed, there's one tool called Open Journal System, and they have on their journals, they have a nutrition label for research, and I think that's just fantastic. And maybe a point of inspiration for other product providers, just to show what indicators for what trust markers are part of this paper, and really help bring it to the forefront. So that way it could be even, human visible, really easy for AI tools to say, okay, these are all the trust markers in this paper. I can get that and I can move forward. And then, as Amanda mentioned, just the provenance is just so important. So the more you can bring that provenance to the forefront, the better for everybody. Okay, and so at a global level, and this is happening all around the world, so persistent identifiers are a topic of conversation at G7 and G20 meetings. It's incredible. The communique that come out of those meetings, there's a lot of talk about public access and research security, and they talk about using persistent identifiers to help with the transparency of research, which will hopefully help with the integrity and research security as well. So we're seeing lots of countries around the world developing national PID strategies. So I think Australia was the first, and they're probably the strongest. They're the furthest along. And so keep an eye on Australia. Their funders are going to be writing funding data to ORCID records, probably starting this summer, followed shortly by Canada. And the US government is working on it too. They've had a little bit of disruption this past year, so they're a little behind schedule, but they're getting there. And so you should start to see funding in ORCID records pretty soon, and we're doing pretty well with citations. I think the next big one is actually employment data. When a researcher says, I promise I work at this prestigious university, for that prestigious university to use a system like Pure and write that employment data to their ORCID record with that nice green check mark helps give them the validity, because it's a reality that funders and publishers need to check. People claim all sorts of stuff, so it's really important. PIDs are democratic. We don't care if you're in a G7 or G20 country. You know, we support everyone. So I think this is one of the great equalizers in research around the world. And watch out, those publisher mandates and the funder mandates are really increasing the need for PIDs. U.S. Department of Agriculture last week published their public access policy, which requires ORCID IDs of their researchers, and the researchers have to list all of their publications on their ORCID record, and they have to be publicly available and visible. So there's some new requirements that are coming in fast. So if you receive U.S. funding, keep an eye out for that. ORCID, we're really moving forward fast. I think I'll skip past this. I put my slides into AI and asked it to come up with an infographic. So if you're more of a visual person, if you want to grab our slides and go through it step by step, it's kind of fun. You know, AI is serious, but you can have a good time with it too. And ORCID, we're doing our strategic planning for 2030. All of this is primary to us, right? It's really, really important. We understand our role in providing that infrastructure that creates that trust in the entire research community. So we take it seriously. I'm going to stop now. Thank you very much.